Greetings and welcome back to a New Perspectives talk. Today we are going to be covering the very interesting and very confusing current situation in Turkey, which is say Turkey itself. I have with me today an interesting guest, a very atypical or non-typical Turkish person. My guest Frank, one thing that's very atypical, he eats consistently in a ketogenic manner, virtually unheard of in Asia Minor or in Turkish culture. That's one thing. He is familiar with human biodiversity. He's not religious, and he spent some time in the United States as well. He has a background in computing and mathematics, if I recall right. So there's a lot of ground to cover here, and I think we're going to get a different perspective than what you might get from I guess your typical Turkish nationalist or somebody on the far left. So you're basically going to get a sort of insider-outsider perspective is the way I would describe it. So Frank, thanks for joining me. I guess the best way to start is to just summarize all these crazy events that have been occurring in the previous current year, well, the past current year, and now maybe the current year. Welcome, by the way.
So Erdogan's been trying to increase his hold on power. He has been trying to consolidate his pseudo-sovereignty, and he's been cooperating with a group called the Gülenists, the Fethullah Gülen's organization. This is a group that's or let's say semi-religious and a kind of cabal that's centered around the idea that they will transform the world through education. And they have hundreds of schools around the world and in Turkey, and they systematically try to enter into positions of power, bureaucracy, in judiciary, in military. They kind of target the bottlenecks of the power machinery. So when Erdogan came into power in 2003, he starts cooperating with the extant machinery that this Gülenist organization already built in the preceding 4 decades. They have been already kind of plotting. Well, plotting is not the right word, but they have been trying to gain influence in the machinery of the state. And after 2003, with the help of this group, Erdogan starts slowly but surely purging the deep state. He changes bureaucracy. He puts his men and Fethullah Gülen's men in parts of the bureaucracy that's not already beholden to this Gülenist organization. He, in around 2008, the Gülenist faction in the judiciary, they start a massive judicial campaign against certain non-Gülenist officers in the military. This lasts 4 years or 5 years actually. They purge many non-Gülenist officials. This causes a massive kind of uproar in the Kemalist factions in society. And around 2013, everything changes. I don't know what happened, and I don't know if this is knowable to us normies, but around 2013, Erdogan and Fethullah Gülen turn on each other. I think my opinion of what happened is that Erdogan kind of came to a realization that he was really dealing with a force that's well beyond his
ability
control.
To control.
Yeah. So he understands that this organization has been infiltrating in every aspect of society, and even his most trusted men are possibly Gülenists. He understands this, and in 2013 he signals that he will start fighting with them. So what do? They start another judicial campaign, this time against Erdogan and his government. So what do? They release very incriminating tapes of corruption, of all kinds of things. This is in December 2013. So how does Erdogan respond? He declares that this is a coup, and he immediately orders massive reassignments of the police force. He purges a large portion of the judiciary. So it turns out that Gülenists were not in total control of the system after all. So after 2013, Erdogan, after this incident, Erdogan becomes very paranoid. He starts complaining and talking all the time about this organization, which the Kemalist parts of Turkey already knew. They already feared this organization. They have been warning everyone against them. But again, they were purged in 2008 from power. So then comes 2016. In July of 2016, I think this is my personal opinion, Erdogan got lucky. I think Putin saw an opportunity to make him his ally, which they were not before, by virtue of Turkey being an ally of USA and NATO. So I think that Putin somehow got the information that the Gülenist faction in the army were preparing a coup. And I think he warned him 2 or 3 days before the happening. And Erdogan saw an opportunity in this coup. He allowed the coup to start and kind of proceed in a botched manner, and so that the disloyal parts and the Gülenist parts may reveal themselves by starting this thing.
So Frank, if I can ask a question, what would you say the major ideological differences are between Erdogan, I know I'm mispronouncing that, and I guess his former wife or this other organization? I mean, they don't get along anymore. But what are the major points of differentiation ideologically between the two?
I mean, to tell the truth, ideologically, I don't think there is much difference to talk about. The difference comes from the fact that this Gülenist organization has its own agenda, which is that it wants to gain power for itself. It doesn't want to share power. Before they lost to Erdogan, they saw Erdogan as a mere puppet, a head figure they could control, they could feed whatever agenda they had. And by the way, this group it's very interesting. I mean, they're kind of like a cult. They think and they really believe that they will transform the world through education. They will re-educate the whole world, and this relates to the prophecy of Islam. Islam prophesizes that the whole world will someday become Muslim, right?
Right. So they're both. I mean, Iran and this organization are both at least nominally associated with Islam, or they believe in Islamic principles.
Well, this organization, they're much more intellectual than Erdogan. Erdogan is he's kind of dumb, to be honest.
Thug, I guess.
Yes, I mean, he doesn't have much depth. He's kind of goes wherever the wind blows. I mean, he's kind of like Trump. I mean, Trump is a smart guy, for sure, but he doesn't have an ideology.
Right.
He's pragmatic. He understands how power works. He understands it well, but he doesn't operate on an ideological basis. So Erdogan, on a superficial level, is an Islamist.
Because it's convenient to him.
Yes, exactly. He's kind of using the lower echelons of society, who, by virtue of being having lower IQs and being more criminal, are more susceptible to becoming zealot Islamists.
I might interrupt. So you mentioned IQ. What is? I don't have the data in front of me. What is the average IQ in Turkey?
It's 90 in 90-ish, and
from my understanding, that's basically the threshold for what's called a functional democracy. Now, I won't question the term functional democracy, because democracy is a strange thing, but
yeah, I think that threshold actually comes from Turkey. They look at it and see the lowest IQ democracy in the world, so they say, "Oh, so 90 must be the."
Okay.
I mean, that's my understanding of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it has been a democracy that's been on the edge of working and not working.
Mm.
And I mean, the 90 figure is maybe somewhat misleading, because it's not a homogeneous society. Like, there is the Western parts. I suspect that the average IQ of the Western parts is probably closer to its neighbors, Greece or Bulgaria, who have an average IQ of 93, 94. And we have a major problem of inbreeding in the southern and eastern parts of the country,
which lowers IQ. Yeah.
Yes. So,
as well as creates other problems. I made a video a while back on this issue, basically throughout the Islamic world. It's worse in Pakistan, but I read about that in regards to Turkey. So, I mean, you're the kind of guy who looks at things, from my understanding, from a sort of bottom-up perspective. I mean, would you say that the majority of the problems Turkey is facing with regards to these issues is just a consequence of low IQ? I mean, you could also make the argument that religiosity is largely a consequence of low IQ.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about distal and proximate causes all the time, right? Yeah. So IQ is kind of a more distal cause than Islam. Yeah. So, I mean, it is kind of the problem of the world, right? The growing, ever-growing underclass, the criminal, stupid underclass of the world. So my understanding is that Europe, the Western culture, basically, for 1,000 years, they aggressively hanged and punished their underclass, and as a result, they created a high trust, high IQ society.
That is a theory I've heard. I mean, I think there needs to be more research on it, but it does sound promising. It sounds plausible, at least. I'd say that.
I mean, the figure I know is that they hanged around 1% of population per year, so that's got to have some.
It could. I mean, I'm not trying to look, because I've heard that theory, but let's look at Islamic jurisprudence, though.
That sounds plausible to me.
It does sound plausible too, but Frank, hear me out here, just because I want to make sure we're accurate with what we're saying, or at least try to be. I mean, Islam is very punishing of crime, people who commit crime and what have you. I can't imagine that.
Well, actually, that's not. Well, Islam is very punishing, but the overall civilizational strategy of Islam is very different from that of Christian,
right?
Sort of Roman Catholic strategy. I mean, Islam is weaponization of lower sexual market value males, right? So it's kind of the male counterpart to communists' weaponization of low sexual market value females. I mean, when you look at the Ottoman history, you see that this massive overproduction of low class, this criminal class men who were weaponized against Christian, basically, societies. The Ottoman army had this faction comprised solely of these insane criminals, the wretched of the society.
Useful tools. Yeah.
Yes, and when they win the war, what happens? They come back and they make trouble in their own society, and they are not hanged. Why? Because they'll be used in the next war.
Yeah.
So yes, Islam punishes crime, but I mean, look at ISIS. They're kind of like a criminal gang that has a country, that has a state.
I don't want to get too much off topic, but a more plausible theory I've heard was effectively the byproduct of the Black Death in Europe, which eliminated at least a third of the European population. Now, we're talking just massive casualties here. It stands to reason that many of the people who were in the underclass who couldn't get away or lock themselves in, I mean, certainly people of the upper class died too, that creates a huge vacuum. Probably these other people in the underclass, lower IQs or what have you, if you combine that with a theory of maybe punishing criminals, low IQ criminals, or just people who are intent on crime, that might make sense. The problem with this, Frank, is that we just don't have it's plausible, but we just don't have the research for obvious reasons, because a lot of political correctness and what have you.
Yes.
But I would agree with you that the fundamental problem, the fundamental distal problem in most societies is low IQ. But there are, of course, other issues there. I mean, Turkey is regarded, maybe because it is that sort of borderline threshold country, as sort of the least Islamic country of sorts, right? I've only been there once. It was years ago, but from my understanding, I mean, women tend to walk around without hijab and things like that. Or it depends on their preferences. You have your soap operas as well. They run on YouTube sometimes. And
let me explain it. So Atatürk, the founder of the current instantiation of Turkey, I think, in my opinion, he was probably an atheist, and he actually has maybe misattributed quotes that against Islam, and he probably saw Islam as this relic that must be purged, so that people of Asia Minor may once again progress. So he tried to reform Islam because he saw that he couldn't just change the religion like that. And I think that was tragic because it appears that it's not possible. You can't reform Islam because of what happens. By virtue of creating this secularist kind of state Islamic version of Turkey, he created a massive population that think they're Muslim, but know nothing about Quran, know nothing about their religion. And so what happens? When a person from that secularist faction becomes depressed or looks for a meaning in his life, he turns to his religion, right? Because he thinks that he's Muslim, but he knows nothing about Quran. And when he turns to religion, he sees all kinds of violent things. And since he's depressed, he is susceptible to that kind of thinking. And so this kind of reformation creates this potential time bomb ready to explode out of the whole population. I mean, nominally, they're reformed Muslims. They act modern. They don't combust in spontaneous Allahu Akbaring, right?
Right.
But it's in my opinion, it's a time bomb ready to explode. I don't know if I was able to explain.
Yeah, no, I understand. So, and recently there have been acts of terrorism that have been, documented in the news, often carried out against tourists. And now, according to the news, these tend to be what ISIS usually, or are they the Kurds? I've heard various stories.
Yeah, it's both. When it's against civilians, it's usually ISIS. When the attack targets police or the military, it's the Kurds.
Right. And I mean, maybe we should spend a little bit of time talking about the Kurdish population. I mean, they've been fighting with you guys for a long time.
Yeah, there's a group that escaped being subjected to the domesticating forces of civilization, and to put it bluntly. I mean, they have been living in mountains, non-urban settings for all their existence. So, and because of it, they're still very tribal.
So they're essentially savages, you'd say.
Well, yeah. I mean, not all of them, but they haven't been civilized. I mean, civilization is an evolutionary process, right? You have to you have to get rid of the tribalist urges. You have to undercut your criminal underclass, so on and so forth. And they haven't been subject to these forces. And even Xenophon of Greece mentions this in his Anabasis, right? They have been there for many, many millennia, and they have been doing the same thing. Yeah. In the southeastern mountains of Asia Minor. And they have been basically making a living out of raiding and herding goats, basically. Okay. So, because they are non-civilized, and they have a large criminal underclass population, they tend to be susceptible to violent ideologies like communism and Islamism. One faction, the PKK, the communist Kurds, have been fighting the state for well over 40 years. And there's also other Islamist factions who are against the communists, and they fight each other, but they're equally violent, and they terrorize in an Islamic way. So yeah,
it's very interesting, Frank, because I see you're kind of crafting a theory here, and on the one, I could subscribe to it to a degree. I mean, you're suggesting that some of the dumber lower class people of these groups tend to fall in with communism because it's appealing. You saw this in Latin America as well, in a lot of these.
Yes, and their organizational style are very similar to Latin American terrorist organizations like, what's it called, FARC?
FARC, a Colombian one, right? I mean, there are ones in Mexico and others as well. On the other hand, it's strange. You know, you have this contrast. I mean, communism has this appeal to the lower classes for obvious reasons. The lower classes like utopian thought in general. But then you have a kind of semi-distinguished intelligentsia, starting with a guy like Marx, but moving forward, who finds it appealing throughout academia. So it's kind of a strange paradox, whereas the people in the middle seem to not really fall for it very much at all.
Yeah, it is called the high-low alliance, right? It is a mechanism well studied in political theory. You always have to have a high-class elements in a movement who provide the ideology, who provide support, monetary or otherwise, and they kind of use the lower classes with the ideology to achieve their ends against their rivals, who are also other members of the higher classes. And you see this all the time. The revolutionary communists are always highly educated, and they usually come from academia, and to be honest, they're usually Jewish. Yeah. They're susceptible to this kind of thinking, like probably because they are outsiders in their host societies, so they're susceptible to want to increase their power in that society. Anyway, so what was that? Yeah, my theory is that Islam is kind of, and they're very similar to communism and Islam, in that you see that their alliance in the 20th century all the time, like in the revolution in Iran, before the Islamists, the Khomeinis, the communists, they were allies, basically. And you see this in the West too. The feminist, progressive, social justice warrior Islam alliance. The establishment basically uses both the Islamist, the Muslim criminal population, and all kinds of criminal population as a cudgel against middle class, whom they see as enemies, basically, I think.
Yeah. Well, why do you think they see hostility or the sort of state of being an enemy in the middle class?
Because middle class is a threat to them. They can rise and challenge their power. So, I mean, the neo reaction talks about this, the competition between the Red Empire and the Blue Empire, right? The Blue Empire being the State Department, the media, academia complex, and the Red Empire being the military, the basis of the US empire. They are competing for power, and the Blue Empire uses the criminal underclass, which you can see in the voting patterns, right? The criminals overwhelmingly vote Democrats. So,
yeah. Now, I mean, I want to get back to some of this, but to get to some more mundane aspects here.
So I actually didn't finish.
Sorry, go on, please.
The narrative of what happened in 2016, right? So we can go there if you want.
Sure.
So after Erdogan turned this coup into an opportunity to purge and basically gain sovereignty by letting it go and fail, he declared a state of emergency, which means that no more due process, no more regular normie stuff that makes the normies comfortable. The police can seize anything. They can come into your house and make arrests without declaring any reason. And this state of emergency we have been living in for over 6 months now. And Erdogan's new project is basically to gain full sovereignty by waging war against academia and the remnants of Gülenists in bureaucracy, in judiciary. He has purged thousands and thousands of workers and all kinds of bureaucrats. And now we have an approaching election to decide whether we want to transition into a new presidential system or not. And in this new system, the new system basically gives dictatorial powers to the president. I mean, it is kind of absurd in that it creates an absolute sovereign that is elected every 5 years. So my prediction is that it will massively destabilize the country, because when you have that much power in the table, you don't have elections, you have civil war.
Yeah. What is, I mean, we talked a lot about Erdogan. I mean, there was an incident that occurred in Germany a few months back. I'm trying to remember the name of this comedian. And it doesn't really matter his name. I'm pretty sure a German person in the audience might remember. In any event, I think this is Jan something. In any event, yeah. So he made fun of Erdogan in some comedic skit. Mm-hmm. And this caused a huge uproar in Germany. I think Erdogan intervened himself, wanted him punished according to German law. It seems that Europe, my impression is that Europe basically wants to placate Erdogan more than anything else, or maybe they just want him out of their hair. I know, as a European living in Europe, I absolutely do not want Turkey to ever be part of the EU for obvious reasons.
Yes, I concur.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if European leadership in general, who just, I mean, I'm being very facetious, I guess. They basically say, well, it's his country, let him do what he wants. I mean, yes, some people offer criticism and what have you, but I think maybe they just want to in some sense, move away from Turkey by almost placating him. Maybe I'm incorrect in that observation, though. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, their behavior is really hard to understand. I mean, I don't have a really good theory about why they placate him. It might be part of their alliance with Islam in their own countries. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they're using the Islamic immigration, as a tool against their own population. They're kind of trying to elect a new population, so to speak. And Erdogan may be part of that plan. I mean,
by the way, the comedian was Jan Böhmermann. There was a court decision, I think, in Mainz in Germany, and Erdogan actually spoke out against it, even though he has no authority in Germany. It's interesting. Apparently, His Majesty was insulted by this. Well, this is interesting. I mean, what you're suggesting, I think, if I understood you right, is that the European elite have an interest in just sort of a pronounced interest in flooding Europe with essentially Islam or Islamic immigrants. I mean, obviously, to some degree, this has happened. I'm not so sure if this is intentional in the sense that they're thinking, yes, we cannot wait to have a nice Islamic society.
I mean, that's the thing about decentralized conspiracies, right? The participators don't think they're conspiring. They just do. I mean, that's what you see in media. During the presidential elections in the USA, they were all against Trump, right? And I don't think they were conspiring in a conscious manner. They were just doing it in a decentralized manner.
Well, I think the official line... Well, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting you bring this up. I was talking a few days ago to a blue pill friend of mine, Normie, whatever. He's half Turkish, half German, officially, although he's German by citizenship, but so speaks fluent Turkish, etc. And he's very far left, although he's pretty reasonable considering that. He kind of made this point, I'd have to agree with him, that we're kind of, whatever your issues with it, we're kind of stuck with what we have. I mean, I don't really think there's a way, as much as I'd love to if I could snap my fingers, to sort of eject Islam from Europe or transform the demographics into something non-Islamic. And
to that to happen, we need to see a major civil war in Europe.
Yeah.
Short of a civil war, it won't happen.
Right, and despite there's some people, particularly in the alt-right and some others, who are yearning for conflict. I mean, I'm not sure. I certainly don't want to live through a civil war. I think most reasonable people would prefer that not to be the case. It's just, I mean, getting back to Turkey, in Turkey it seems much more likely, if only, as you pointed out, of the chances of a civil war, if only because of...
Yes, due to this new presidential system. I mean, before that, I wouldn't say that chances of a civil war is that high, because the demographics doesn't allow it. We're not armed. The Kemalist whitish parts of the country are unarmed, are completely unarmed. The Kurds are already fighting, so there's a low intensity civil war going on in those parts, but that's not affecting the economy too much. And who else can fight? Erdogan's criminal tools. They are armed criminally, and he can send them over to the Kemalist population to intimidate them. He can use them. And by the way, that's part of the state strategy since the inception of the republic. In 1950s, the intelligence organization staged a false flag, and that's a well-known, well-documented event. They staged a false flag saying that Atatürk, the house in which Atatürk was born in Salonika was bombed, and this caused a massive riot in Istanbul, during which the Christian and Greek population had to flee. Like hundreds of thousands of Christians fled the country. Their homes, their businesses were looted for 2-3 days. And this was a conspiracy, a strategy to purge non-Islamic elements from the country. And again, today we can see a similar thing happening. Erdogan could basically send his thugs, his Islamic thugs, to the secularist parts, and we could see that happening, but that would be kind of dumb. Why? Because the economy kind of the secular parts kind of make the economy happen. They are the productive parts of the country, so purging them would create a very shitty situation financially, economically. So if he has just a little bit of sense, I think he wouldn't do that. So that's why I would say that a probability of a civil war is low. But this new presidential system changes everything, because once, like I said, once you create a system in which there's that much power in the table, you basically have to fight to death to get what's on the table. And after Erdogan is dead or done, it will devolve into a civil war. So maybe in 10, 15 years, maybe in 2030, we'll probably see a civil war in Turkey. That's what happens after a dictator is deposed or is done with politics, right? As much as I hate him, Saddam was holding Iraq together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Once he's gone, it's a total mess. The same will happen here.
Yeah, and yeah. I really hope if it does happen that there's no Western intervention, because, well, that can't do any good.
Yeah. It's hard to predict, because we're kind of going through a major transition in the geopolitical dynamics. We're transitioning from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, I think. And part of it is that countries like Turkey are trying to get their sovereignty back. And it will be bloody, I think.
Well, you stand outside of Turkish society, obviously, for a variety of reasons. You spent time in the United States. What is your interest in staying in Turkey?
Nothing. I'm just lazy.
Yeah, tell me about it. I know what that's like.
I need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, I don't have the same urgency of getting out of Germany. As boring as Germany is, I basically like it more or less. But in your case, it's a lot more severe, obviously, because...
Yeah, the thing is, though, once you get your financials in order, if your wealth is highly mobile, you can kind of get out even after the civil war breaks, right? I mean, you can. It would be dangerous, but you can get out. So my main priority right now is to get all my wealth into Bitcoin, so that it's mobile.
Not a bad idea. I mean, what is the time span or the horizon that you're suggesting with regards to this forthcoming civil war, if in fact that takes place?
As soon as Erdogan leaves office for whatever reason.
That could take 10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
That could take 20 years, but as soon as that happens, we'll have a civil war. Erdogan is right now what Saddam was to Iraq. He's holding the country together, for ill or worse, for ill or good. I mean, I don't like him. He's bringing us to a very bad situation, but as long as he's in office, I think we won't have a civil war. But as soon as he's gone, which eventually will happen, we'll have a mess in our hands.
I mean, have you considered returning to the United States then?
Yes. I mean, there are many options, but I'm kind of looking into cheaper countries.
Okay.
So that I can live cheaply while working on the internet.
Yeah, but then there's the visa. I mean, it's always going to be an issue with the visa, right?
Yeah, so that's why I'm looking into countries in which I don't have to get a visa.
Such as?
There are many. I mean, the backwater East Caucasian countries, like, I think you don't have to get a visa in Georgia or in...
Possibly not, no.
Yeah. Or in Abkhazia.
Right.
I mean, I'm mostly a recluse, so I don't require a developed country to live in. I just need it to be cheap.
Right.
That's why I'm kind of still here currently. It's cheap.
Well, that's a good reason as any. You're certainly not attached to Turkish culture or religion or even the food. So
no.
Is there?
So that's why I don't even. I mean, I don't like to comment about politics when I talk with my friends, because I don't see the right in myself to do that, because I'm not paying the price to do that. I mean,
well, are your friends more traditional in their politics or more conventional, would you say?
I mean, I have all kinds of friends from the political spectrum, from the communists to the Islamists.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Islamist is not the right word, but I have friends that say they would like to have Sharia system, which they think is a utopian system, and we didn't have in the world since the times of the Muhammad or something. And these are very smart people, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's the typical. I mean, you can have that kind of thinking when you have Islam in your society. That's why I think Islam is a very dangerous meme. It's a dangerous memetic complex, and it has to be treated like polio or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion. As long as you don't take it seriously, it will spread. And it will take civilization with itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's one of those questions, long-term questions. I don't. I guess it's fairly obvious, but there's no real civilizational benefit to Islam, long term at least. I mean, you might get people to propagate their genes and
Yeah, I mean, it's a dysgenic strategy, right?
yeah,
It encourages people to reproduce massively and conquer through genetic means.
yeah,
And in doing so, it causes dysgenics.
yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked about this before, obviously, but these are topics that are not very popular in the mainstream, so it's difficult to have a conversation about this. I mean, people are willing, with regards to the inbreeding issue. I've certainly noticed that people are willing to criticize that, or say, well, in the British Pakistani community where you still get a lot of inbreeding, they say, well, it's God's will, but there are medical brochures, and they try to educate them. It doesn't seem to work very well, but I mean, some of the other more quote unquote controversial aspects are obviously difficult to address. But essentially, what we can take from this is that Turkey is a doomed land, and yeah,
Yes, I
pretty
would say so.
much.
I mean, it's in, I kind of see it as the future of the West.
Okay.
I mean, this was once the wealthiest part of the world. Not that long ago, actually. I mean, go back a millennium, and it's pretty much the wealthiest part of the world, right? The East Roman Empire. And then came Islam. So once you allow Islam in, you wreck your shit.
Yeah. Well,
And
this is kind of my observation as well.
Yeah, this is happening in the West, and if we don't do something, or you don't do something, it won't be recoverable, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's true. I think the Central European countries will hold out a bit longer, but eventually it'll probably just all go to shit. I'm pretty black-pilled about this, but I
Yeah, I mean, like, the way I see it, civil war looks like a really messy thing, and it's profoundly undesirable. But on the other hand, if it's the only way to save civilization, I mean, maybe.
long term. But we're not part of this. We sort of exist outside of this. I see myself
Yeah,
as an observer. So I mean, what
yeah,
happens will happen. I imagine.
yeah. We don't have a say in that, so we
Exactly.
just observe and speculate.
Yeah. Yeah. Shame though. You're an oddity amongst Turkish people because, well, as you already know, most Turks don't think and feel the same things you do. So
Yeah, I mean, you'll have the normies in all societies. I mean, they make the society function, the economy turn, they produce, and they don't have the time to think deeply about things. So, and when their average IQ is low, you get a lose-lose situation like this.
well, there is a upper middle class, a Turkish. I remember one of my ex-wives had a Turkish friend. She looked nearly white. Both her parents were highly educated. They had money too. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that type of Turk exists as well.
Yes, that's it. I mean, that's the core of the economy, actually.
Yeah.
The middle class money makers. But mm, they their time horizons is not in the civilizational scale. They, I mean, they don't think in centuries or millennia. So I mean, they don't see Islam or the dysgenics as a problem.
Yeah. Well,
The,
I said in a recent video, very recent video, that we didn't evolve as animals to think in these sort of very long term perspectives or long term scales. I mean, at best, maybe a few decades. Very difficult a few centuries. Even more difficult a few millennia.
and it's also an incentive game, right? This is actually Hans Hermann Hoppe's one of Hans's arguments. He says that when you have a democracy, it radically shrinks the time horizons. When you have a monarchy, because the estate is your property, you want to accumulate capital, you want to make it better, you take care of it, you look after it, because you want to leave a good legacy to your heir. And in democracies, you have the tragedy of the commons. Nobody cares about the genetic capital, the cultural capital, the commons. Nobody cares about that because nobody owns it. So yeah, it's also an incentive game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, the things we discussed could apply to virtually any country. But then again,
Yes.
you have this phenomenon of wealthier, high IQ countries. They just all end up not reproducing very much in general. This has been kind of well studied in MGTOW circles, at least, that you reach a certain level of wealth and prosperity. Probably you have a certain average IQ. And it gets to the point in some countries, such as South Korea, where the government tries to pay people to have children. It's just not a popular option. There are all kinds of theories to try to explain why this is the case. They say, well, it's just too expensive. That's, of course, part of it. But I think it just comes down to basic economics and basic and IQ as well. I mean, the dumbest people who have the least money need children essentially for labor purposes. And whether that's immediately in the home or outside or taking over some business or some form of employment. That's what that's what children were for a very long time. When you get rid of that, you no longer have that incentive. More intelligent people tend not just to fuck and then end up getting pregnant. It does happen. So
Yes.
it's
Also,
yeah, go on.
yeah, there is also the aspect that female sexual market value, female status, is in a bubble, and due to hypergamy, they don't marry. They don't want to have kids. I mean, when you have an inflation of female status, you won't get children. That's my understanding. So one way to increase fertility rates, this hypothesis would predict that if you decrease female education and female status.
Okay, I just want to, have to offer this disclaimer. I mean, I think this is an interesting subject. I thought about it too. I'm not, I don't endorse
I'm just
this.
putting it out there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hypothesizing as well. I agree. I think, and this is something that people say on the alt-right would have to think about. I mean, I'm not interested in this game, but the fact of the matter is, giving women mass education, which is, regarded as this great thing, probably was one of the major contributing factors to lower birth rates, accessibility to birth control. I mean, essentially, if you want to get your sort of, let's say you're alt-right, you want your white European dream, or whatever dream that might be, you have to essentially deprive women of the modern rights they've come to know and accept and take for granted, quite frankly. And nobody, no politician in his right mind, and no public person in his right mind would ever endorse something like that. I mean, I'm not talking about slavery, but you would essentially just have to exclude women almost wholesale from these things. You might be able to make an exception for some polymath or some very high IQ woman. And, I mean, I don't...
Yeah, you would essentially have to figure out a way of lowering female status. That's it.
You couldn't do that really through conventional means. I mean, like I said, no modern Western or Western-style society would say, well, we're going to strip women of most of their rights. They're going to be confined to the home and hearth, and they can, you know, their job is to cook and clean and suck their husband's dick, and that's it. And
yes,
I mean, that's not going to happen.
Usually that comes in the form of invasion. And
right, yeah, invasion. And of course, women being adaptable creatures, if it came to some invasion and society restructured itself, that's what they would do. They would just fall into line. Women are just flexible. They're like water that fills a vessel. They just fill whatever the shape of the current environment might be. But Western men aren't willing to do that. And so if you wanted to, I think the long-term hope of humanity, and it's a very, very slim hope, is genetic reengineering.
Yes.
We've evolved to the point now where we're so maladapted to the modern environment in so many ways, and there's no way around it. We can't I've struggled to sort of rewire my own physiology through mental exercises and the acquisition of knowledge, but it doesn't work. I would have to be fundamentally altered from the genome upwards, and I think this is probably the only way in long term, to change these things. I don't think conventional reproduction in this sort of future genetically altered world would be a particularly useful thing. And if we got to the point where we understood, because we still have a reasonably poor understanding of genetics, because so many genetic effects are pleiotropic, and so we don't know which genes are involved, and it's rarely one, if any. I mean, until recently, fairly recently, people thought of what one gene was responsible for eye color, when I believe it's 4 in total. So, we
don't even know the genes involved in intelligence, right?
We don't know. We have some suggestions or some ideas. So, I don't know. I mean, I think, and this is kind of my thing, I think that people should, as a society, we should be striving towards advancing genetic research so we can get to that point where we can overcome this problem, because the civilizational problems will be fixed. I agree with you. Like, let's say we could somehow boost the world IQ. Just so, we figure, this is of course just science fiction, they figure out some formula, and they can put it in a pill that you swallow with a glass of water, right? And, okay, maybe it's temporary, it lasts a week. So once a week you swallow this, and within 24 hours, all of a sudden you get a 20-point IQ boost. I mean, the world would transform virtually overnight. There would be people with, 90 IQs in Turkey thinking, oh, why am I religious all of a sudden? Everything would change. So I do think that's ultimately a game changer. I don't think it solves all the problems. You see a lot of intelligent people falling into the traps of strange and mismatched ideologies, but it would certainly be the best thing we could do, even though it wouldn't be a perfect solution.
Yes. I mean, we kind of have to push through, dig ourselves out of this ditch.
Yeah, Frank, the thing is, this is kind of the last and only hope, is genetic reengineering long term. I mean, there's CRISPR, we're moving towards that. I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime, the type of changes we maybe like to see, or the things that are necessary, but it's clear to me that you can't restructure society from the ground up. There's so many. The old traditional mindset is just it's dead. It doesn't work anymore. You look at places like Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Belarus and whatever. they actually have higher divorce rates than the West. They're 60% plus usually. Um, this is all dead. And
Yeah,
no.
I mean, it's like trying to be a knight in the era of firepower.
Yeah, it's
you
like
can't do
riding
it.
on a horse with a lance, and you have this really heavy armor on. And this is the fallacy, I think, and a lot of people on the alt-right don't understand that their picture of the world is a bit too monolithic. They just think, well, we can resurrect this if we just, I don't know, act like quote-unquote real men and we'll get women and whatever. That No, it's done. Barring some civil war, which you mentioned, which involves the entire West with massive loss of human life.
I mean, that's kind of what they look for, isn't it?
I don't think everyone does, but a lot of these guys on the alt-right do kind of yearn for a kind of conflict, either where they can prove their so-called manhood, or it's just you just purge everyone.
Because how do you clean the genetic commons otherwise?
Right. There's an ethical dilemma, and I'm not suggesting here cleaning anyone.
I'm speaking in a completely amoral.
Yeah, in a hypothetical sense. Just like I mentioned before, I mean, if society were willing, yeah, I mean, they could just basically, enslave women, right? You could never let them leave the house. You could have, I mean, there are all these things you could do that we would just never do, and I'm not suggesting that we do it. I personally, I don't really care what women do. They want. I mean, it is kind of this mass female freedom probably was one of the contributing factors to all this, but. I actually know, women from so-called traditional societies that are pretty fucking miserable in those situations. So I almost have sympathy with me. It's just not an ideal thing. I certainly wouldn't want to live in a traditional setup or role. So, yeah, I mean, the only reasonable, somewhat ethical way to proceed would be through genetic modification and changes to our genome fundamentally. That, of course, carries with it other alleged ethical concerns. They get religious people intervening and what have you. But in places like China that don't really think about these things too much or don't find it to be an issue, it's not a big deal. They're just proceeding as planned, and it's fine. But yeah, I think every conventional means of reforming society will fail to address some of these key issues, and it is essentially a time bomb. So until we can even become something more than human, I don't even know how useful this traditional prehistoric, mate selection is or will be in the future. Not if we want to ever become a spacefaring species or really just move past some of these ridiculous notions we have about God or the world or what have you. But yeah, I think Turkey is a great example of a place that, as you pointed out, will probably end up in civil war, but people just don't get it. And this is the big problem. I think it's people who live in the shadows, such as ourselves, who discuss these things, who observe. We're not, we don't really have any stakes in it, I suppose. And the rest of the world is just blind. I mean, my left-wing friend, half Turkish friend, he just thinks that, everything will be fine. He supported the Merkel policy of inviting all these refugees. I mean,
honestly, that's kind of
smart guy.
Genetic interests. People speak for their genetic interests.
He's smart. I don't know what his IQ is. He's a scholar of 17th century Ottoman history. He's not an idiot,
Yeah, I know, but that's kind of my hypothesis.
Okay.
It's that without understanding, speak for their genetic interests.
Oh yeah.
So he's not genetically German. He's not Germanic, so...
Well, he's half German.
Yeah, but still, he probably feels somehow like an outsider, right? He's not totally German.
I mean, he's got a pretty complicated sense of identity, and he's actually brought up some pretty good points. But yeah, I mean, he's I think he feels German, but
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe he's an outlier, probably, actually.
I think he is. He's much more reasonable than most left-wing people I know, even though he's quite far.
Yeah, in my experience, intelligent left-wing people are come from lower part of the higher class. They see themselves as they kind of resent the upper classes for some reason or another, and so they want to change the power structure, and the left offers a disruption to the power structure. So this is in my experience. So the small bourgeoisie, the lower aristocratic class people that want to get power, in my experience, these kind of people tend towards leftist / socialist / communist type of ideologies.
You could argue that the status quo is pretty far left, at least in Germany. So
yeah,
kind of hard to say.
The default is being a leftist in Germany, right? Isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's. I don't know.
I mean, in my circles, if you're an apolitical guy, if you're not into politics, if you don't think about this stuff, you're almost by default programmed to be sympathetic to leftist policies by the media.
Right.
And even in here, where you have a massive shift towards more zealous Islam. So, isn't that kind of like that in Germany too?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, pretty much. If you don't publicly toe the party line or whatever that might be. If you're not pro-multiculturalism, I don't know, just everyone's the same, what have you. I mean, I tend to, I'm pretty neutral about a lot of this, even though I have my own opinions. I just don't. When I talk to my friend, I tend to keep the politics out of it. I don't really go into depth about my views on various things. But, even then, I mean, he had some interesting arguments I was thinking about. I said, well, we were talking about sort of questions of identity, and I said, I don't really consider myself German, but I have a very deep connection to the German language. And he said, well, you're more German than you are Swedish or even Hungarian, because my German's vastly better than my Hungarian in that regard. So I get his attempt, and I think it's correct that certain identities are multi-layered, and it's not just sort of atomized where you're nothing. Because I think there is a tendency that's inaccurate if you actually examine to look at identity for expedient reasons of expediency. In the case of the alt-right and some other people say, you're just this and that's it. Or you look at a passport and you say that the passport is what you are and that's it. I do think that there's some truth to that. There's sort of a conglomeration of various identities thrown into one. I mean, German language is a strong part of my identity, but does that make me German? I certainly don't feel that, but I do feel some connection to some aspect of German culture that makes German culture German. It's strange, but I don't think in the bigger picture people have time for that. They're not going to sit back and say, well, you did this when you were this age and you had this experience. People want very simplistic, easy to identify, what I call it the either-or thinking, the black and white thinking of and I think he's probably, my left-wing friend probably is accurate about that. But and this tends to be the case with people with more international experience and I guess somewhat more intelligent people. I doubt your, 89 IQ Turkish guy in Ankara is he probably just thinks of himself as a Turk and a Muslim in most cases. I don't, who's never left Ankara, say.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the capabilities of a 90 IQ man, I mean, he can't really fully understand a paragraph which contains abstract ideas. He can't really understand it, right? So we're talking about a guy that can't fully follow written instructions. He has to be shown what to do, right? So,
well, and additionally, and this is the flaw I think often on the left. You take my friend, for example. He because he himself is a very intelligent guy. He studied mathematics in addition to Turkish and Turkish history. He assumes that he transfers his own ability onto other people. He assumes that the refugees on average would be able to appreciate his, say, multifaceted viewpoint on an identity, or able to accept certain things. It's just not the case. There's no evidence to suggest that. But he does push that idea because that's how he feels. And
outliers bias.
Yeah, precisely. It's an outliers bias. I didn't get in a discussion with him about that. So I did, as I said, I think he's accurate to say that in some cases, identity is sort of multi-layered. And in my case, I was born in the United States, but I haven't lived there in ages, and I was exposed to all these different languages. And so I actually struggle to say what I am sometimes. If I'm playing an online game, people say, where are you from? What are you? And I could just say I'm an American, but I feel that just doesn't really justify my own perception of my own existence. So it's just sort of strange. But I think that once again, that's an outlier feeling and not something that's very common. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if I wish people like him would be more interested in promoting genetic augmentation or engineering. But what can you do?
Yeah, we have our biases that we are deracinated, I think. Yeah. I mean,
well, yeah, and this is regarded as a terrible thing. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it has its positives and negatives.
Well, Frank, I would argue that if I had not deracinated myself, I don't think I would have been happy just existing in the microcosm of New York within the greater country of the United States. I mean, there was something in me, not a calling, but I just wanted to get out of that and experience other things. Some people think that's a horrible thing. Well, that's fine.
I mean, it's kind of like the Faustian Faustian exchange, right? You exchange blissful happiness for knowledge, and to gain knowledge, you kind of have to deracinate yourself. I mean, if I tried to be more part of Turkish society, I would never have the knowledge I have right now.
No, of course.
I mean, I would know about the reality of IQ, about the HBD, about I don't know. I would probably have skepticisms towards religion or Islam, but I mean, you have to get out of the culture you're part of in order to understand it, and in doing so, you deracinate yourself, and you can no longer be truly part of it. So
Agreed.
That's the exchange.
Agreed. This is a fortunate or unfortunate truth, depending on the way you look at it. But I want to thank you for joining me and presenting probably one of the more unique, is that even a proper construction, more unique in any event, one of the more unique perspectives with regards to Turkey. I'm sure you could get tons of quote-unquote normal Turkish people to give you a quote-unquote normal viewpoint. I would share your viewpoint if only because I am a deracinated and in the eyes of many atomized and horrific individual. Yeah, I tend to think on grander scales rather than just sort of national ones, and I think you do the same thing.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And to be clear, I don't represent the average Turkish guy. I don't.
Yeah.
They would probably see my ideas, my opinions as horrendous, as non-representing, as probably insulting.
Dangerous,
so
maybe. Yeah.
To the guy listening to this, I'm not the representative, so.
Right. Yeah. Well, I find these differentiated perspectives to be quite interesting and relevant. So, well, thank you again for being here and offering us your point of view. Yeah, I hope you guys who are listening enjoy this because they don't make most Turks like the Franks here. So anyway, thanks for joining us. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.